Hello, my name is Christopher DeLay, and today I'm doing another one of my PKI basics videos. So the idea behind these videos is to give like a provide education around PKI. There are some folks that are new to maybe IT or are just new to cryptography or PKI and just want to learn about it, so I'm just providing an avenue for that to happen. So I'm starting this series off with actually this whole series will probably be basics. I think if I start to move into more advanced topics, I'll do like a PKI, I don't know, intermediate level or something like that. So if you want to get more, there's other videos at my YouTube page, and there's also my blog, which is x.509.blog, so feel free to join there. I think I'm going to do a post soon that just has a link to all my videos to kind of give people that are interested in my website a chance to view some of my videos as well. So again, this is my way of giving back to the community. So if you really kind of like what I'm doing, go ahead and leave a message underneath this video, or feel free to reach out to my contact page on my blog and let me know how you liked it, and if there was something you didn't like about the video, let me know. This video is going to be somewhat long. I'm really not sure how long, maybe in the range of 45 minutes to an hour. So if you have a short attention span, you may just want to come back and watch this in different pieces. But today we're going to talk about certificate enrollment, and we're just there are different types of certificate enrollment, such as you can use Cisco SEP protocol, you can use certificate enrollment web services, you can use the native RPC enrollment. We're kind of just going to touch on the native RPC enrollment and generally how enrollment works, and then maybe in a later video we'll touch on some of those other topics. So obviously if you're enrolling for certificates, certification authorities are important. I did another video on certification authorities that goes into probably more detail than we're going to go here, but since we are talking about enrollment, we do need to at least discuss certification authorities to some degree. So basically, certification authorities, especially in the Microsoft PKI, provide a number of functions. So one is it issues certificates, so that's kind of what we all are aware of that CAs do. They issue certificates, so that's our primary concern. CAs also publish CRLs, or certificate revocation list, and that's another function of the CA, so that's a way to provide revocation for certificates. And the CA, at least the Microsoft CA, it provides a registration authority role. So a registration authority basically validates or verifies your identification before it issues you a certificate. In terms of how we do that with the Microsoft PKIs, it's typically done with Kerberos authentication. And so if you're going to request a certificate, let's say as a user, you will Kerberos off to the CA, and then it will verify who you are, and then if it needs to pull specific attributes for your account to include in the certificate, it'll do it based on that authentication. So those are the three primary roles that CAs provide. There are two types of CAs, so at least in Microsoft terminology, right? So there's a standalone CA and an enterprise CA. So the main difference is that an enterprise CA uses certificate templates and a standalone CA does not. Sometimes folks think about standalone CAs being like offline CAs, but it's not necessarily the case, because standalone CAs can be domain joined. It's just typical that if you do have an offline route, it would typically be a standalone certification authority, because an enterprise CA would require certificate templates, which requires Active Directory. And since it's offline, there's not really a possibility for Active Directory integration. So these are the two ways that you will refer to different CAs based on whether they use certificate templates or not. So the enterprise CA requires Active Directory for Kerberos authentication. There's also PKI related objects that are stored in Active Directory, and I'm sure there's definitely other reasons why it does use Active Directory, just pointing out some major ones that come to mind here. Again, with the enterprise CA, we use certificate templates are used for enrollment, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And also, I guess the other point I have here is that if you want to do auto enrollment, you also have to have an enterprise CA. A standalone CA will not work for that. So when we talk about Active Directory integrations, so basically we want to talk about the components that are part of Active Directory that are related to the PKI. So there are PKI related objects located in the configuration partition Active Directory. I will show you that in a moment. Hopefully I have the AD RSAT tools installed on my CA. They're located in this public key services container that's in the configuration partition. And some other key things that are in there is there's this enrollment services object, which is leveraged for enrollment, and then also the certificate templates, which we still haven't discussed in any detail, are stored there as well. So now we're just going to do a quick demo. So hopefully I do have the RSAT tools installed, and what I'm going to do here real quick, I should have did this before. Just want to make sure I don't have any pop-ups during my presentation here. So go to our CA. Hopefully we have the RSAT tools installed. So this is in my lab that's hosted locally here. So let me just start from the beginning, just in case you want to do this in your own environment and you're not super familiar with these tools. So I'm going to remove this. So sure, get rid of it. So basically you'd open up adsiedit.msc, and then you would right click on adsiedit, connect to. Any domain controller is going to host a configuration partition, so which one doesn't really matter so much. In this environment I only have one because it's just a lab. So just select configuration, and typically you should just click OK. Credentials really shouldn't matter in terms of just viewing stuff. Obviously, if you want to make changes to the configuration partition, you would need to be an enterprise admin. So all our PKI stuff is basically under services, public key services, and so here we have all the different containers. So here we have our AIA container. This is the authority information access. So if we're using LDAP as an AIA repository, this would be where it would be. CDP, CRL distribution points. So if we're using LDAP as a CDP repository, this is where it would be. And for going back to AIA, you would have this little object here for each CA. For CDP, you first have this folder. You may name it something other than the CA, but for each CA you typically have a folder, and underneath here you'd have the object that holds the CRLs. Certificate templates, so all your certificate templates are located in this location. There are typically, well really from a supportability standpoint, you should always manage and modify templates in the certificate template MMC. However, there are some occasions where there's some settings in there that you can't change. For example, on some of the version 1 templates, let's see, which would be like a domain controller. In the GUI and the certificate template snap-in, you can't change some stuff. For example, like key size, you can't change for the version 1 templates. So if you wanted to set the minimum key size, you'd have to set it here in adsiedit. Certification authority, so this is going to be all my trusted root CAs. So here's 2 of my trusted root CAs. This lab is set up a little bit wonky, so it's definitely not set up for best practices. I don't believe I have an offline root CA in this environment. I just kind of throw up CAs mostly for documenting different things. So like if I'm documenting how to deploy search domain controllers, I just set up a CA and do my work and don't really worry about it. Also sometimes show some decommissioning work with this environment. So it's not definitely, I don't have, all my CAs are enterprise root CAs. That means they're both a root CA and an enterprise issuing CA, which really goes against best practice. But this is where your root CAs would be stored. If they're stored in this container, they'll get deployed to domain members as a trusted root. Enrollment services, so we'll see later on when you go to enroll, this object is critical because we'll talk about what happens, and I guess I'll tell you now and then repeat myself later. But during the enrollment process, if you're using the native RPC enrollment, the client will query Active Directory for a list of well, first it will query for a list of templates, and then once it figures out what templates it wants, it'll query for a list of CAs that have that template. And then I guess the other piece of that is, how does it know what templates are on there? Well, there's a certificate templates attribute here, and so you can see the certificate templates that are on here. Okay, so KRA, if you're doing key archival, there's like a public key cert for the CA that I believe is on this in this container. We really don't have a lot of I don't really see a lot of people use key archival. Key archival is where the private key is backed up into the CA database for certs that are issued. It can be set on a per template basis. It only really gets leveraged if you use certs for like email encryption or something. Well, it's only for encryption certs, so email encryption. Because if you're doing email encryption, you want to make sure that you can get that cert back if you ever accidentally delete it, so you can kind of decrypt emails. So here is the OIDs. So OIDs, these are just internal leg numbers that are used as a way to reference a different thing. So some OIDs map to certificate templates, some OIDs map to application policies, so it's just another way. So for example, I could refer to a certificate template by its name, or I could refer to it by its OID. So it's just a kind of like, if you want to think about, I was going to say DNS names to IP addresses. I don't know if that's the best example, but something similar to that, I guess, would be a way to look at it. Probably not the best way, but one way to help visualize it. And then finally, there's this NT-auth certificates. So this is where we store certificates for CAs that are trusted for like smart card authentication. There may be other reasons, but off the top of my head, just smart card authentication. So if you want your CA to, if you want certificates issued by your CA to be trusted for smart card authentication, they need to be in this container. And so obviously, if you don't want your CAs to be trusted for smart card authentication, you can remove them from here. There is another way to view these objects. It's a little bit more user-friendly. So if you go to Enterprise PKI here, you can go to Manage AD Containers. And that will pull up PKI view here. So here we go with PKI view. Did it come up? Let's do that again. Manage AD Containers. Okay, we see this little window that pops up. Now basically this window has a tab for each of those containers, as you'll see here, and so you can actually in these see the actual CA certificates and CRILs that are stored in these containers. So it's a little bit more friendly, because if you look at these things in ADSI Edit, for example, you go to properties and CA certificate, you just see this here, which is not really kind of real intuitive what that is. So again, if we go to PKI view, we get kind of a better view, so you can navigate these containers. You can also, if you're cleaning up your environment, you can remove CAs from this environment, and you can also view the certificates that are in there. So that's another way that you can go through and view those templates. There's a third way that you, I guess if you really wanted to, you could do it this way, although I don't really see why you would do this. So if you go to dssite.msc, the site and services snap in, which I imagine will load at some point, you can do view show services node, and then you can go into services and public key services, and you'll see those containers as well. So your best view probably is doing PKI view to see what's actually in the container. So that would probably be the way I would go about doing it typically. So those are the different PKI objects. If you really wanted to get into it as well, I guess you could say like, I don't know if now's the best time to talk about it, but you'll see like on like user objects, for example, I don't know if I have any certs on this user account, but you can go to basically, I wish they just made this advanced view enabled by default. It's kind of frustrating that it's not. So we'll view this administrator account and see if we can find published certificates. Yeah, so I don't have anything there. whatever's published here, you're basically, this is just a view into the user certificate attribute, so I don't have anything in there. Okay, so those are the PKI objects that are in Active Directory, so you can go through those different tools and view those objects. I'm just trying to think, I covered what they were used for. Okay, cool. So certificate templates. The next thing we're going to talk about is certificate templates. So what are certificate templates? Certificate templates are kind of exactly what they sound like they are. So they are templates for requesting certificates, essentially. And so they have, version 1 templates aren't, but most templates are configurable. So you can configure the settings that you would like to see. You can modify the configuration of what you would like those certificates to look like. And it's also a way for the CA to kind of determine who should get a certificate and what that and enforce that configuration. So what does all that mean? Typically with Enterprise CA, when you go to do a request, you would select a template. In fact, Enterprise CA, you have to select a template when you do a request, and there's no way around it. So you have to select a template, and then you may fill out some fields. There are some things that are configurable from the user standpoint, and then you would submit that request to the CA. The CA would validate that you have permissions to that template, and if you have permissions, it will basically issue a certificate based on the settings in that template. So that's pretty much what they are. They're a template for requesting and issuing certificates. So there are different certificate template versions. I believe it only goes up to 4, but there may be a version 5 that kind of escapes me. So version 1 came with Windows 2000. You can't really change anything on those templates other than the security, who can enroll, who can read, who can write, that sort of thing. Version 2, you have access to most of the settings. And then as these templates go up, essentially what's happening is more settings are being added. So for example, version 2 templates came out with 2003, so any of the settings you can manipulate in there will work with Windows 2003, Windows XP. Version 3, I believe, was like Windows Server 2008, so any settings you enable in a version 3 template, they would be compatible with Windows 2008, Windows Vista, and so on and so forth. So you can kind of see this in the UI a little bit. So if we go to our certificate template snap-in, which is certtemplate.nsc, you'll see there's a schema version here. So there's 1, 2, and I think the OCSP response is a version 3. What happens is when you go to duplicate a template, even if it's a version 1, you can click duplicate. And based on what settings you select here will result in what version it is. So you'll see when I enable any of these, so I'm saying that my CA is Windows Server 2016. When I do that, it tells me it's enabling these additional features in the certificate template. And same thing for the client. So if I'm saying my client is Windows 10, Windows Server 2016, it's enabling all these additional features. And then I'm just going to call it cert temp test. Okay, I don't know what that name's about, but okay, so there it is, and we're going to click OK. And see, that's a version 4. So it looks like version 4 is probably the highest level of template that we have. One thing when it comes to templates, I don't know if I have this in the slide deck or not, but from a compatibility standpoint, so there is the compatibility thing you saw there, and also there's the compatibility with the web enrollment pages. So we have these web enrollment pages that you can use to enroll for certificates. They haven't been updated in a super long time. So basically you can only use like the version 1 or version 2 templates with the web enrollment pages. You can't use a version 3 or version 4 template. So something to be aware of if you're troubleshooting that. So a little bit more detail on the templates. Version 1s originated in Windows 2000. They cannot be used with auto-enrollment. Again, you can only modify the security descriptor. And you can duplicate them to create a version 2, version 3, or version 4 template, depending on what you select there for the operating systems. I assume this is supposed to be for version 2. I need to fix my slide deck. Version 2, Windows 2003. Almost all the settings are accessible and can be used with auto-enrollment. And then everything moving forward is just going to have more settings, and they can all be used with auto-enrollment. So this just lists 1, 2, and 3, but of course, as we saw, there's a version 4. Basically, everything after version 2 starts to add more settings and features into the template. And I'll actually go through the templates, the settings, and we'll take a look at the different settings, and it'll kind of give you a rough idea. So bear with me for this. If you need a coffee or something, now would be the time to quickly grab this, because this part here is not super exciting. So we will take a look at this cert template test that we created in terms of the settings, and bear with me, I know this is not exciting stuff. So this is the certificate template name. This is what your template name is. A lot of times this may have spaces in it. This is the template name in Active Directory. Typically it does not have spaces in it. This is how long your certificate is valid for, and this is a little bit non-intuitive setting. So if you're using auto-enrollment, so you got to really pay attention to my words here. If you're using auto-enrollment, this is how long before the certificate expires before it will start trying to auto-renew. So according to this, if I had auto-enrollment, this would start trying to auto-enroll 6 weeks before the certificate template, before the certificate expires. So there's this kind of rule that it's number either 80 or 85%. So auto-enrollment will either use this value or 80% of the certificate's lifetime, whichever is shorter. So if you sent this to something crazy like 6 months, then it would use the 80% rule. So then it wouldn't start renewing 6 months before it expired. It'll start renewing at 80% of the certificate's lifetime, whatever that is. Validity period, so you can set this to whatever you want. There is a thing you need to be kind of aware of though. There is, so if we go into the configuration for this CA, there is, go in here, HQ local machine, system, current control set, services, cert service, and then configuration, and then my CA name. So there is this validity period unit and validity period. So in here it's set for 2 years. So that's the maximum. 2 years is the maximum I can issue my cert to. So even if I modified my template and bumped that number up to like 5 years, I'd only be able to issue a cert for 2 years because that number is the maximum setting. So there's also a published certificate in Active Directory. So this will, before I was showing you on a user account the user certificate attribute. So if it's a user account, then it would be the attribute on the user. If it was a computer, it would be on the attribute on that computer. So this publishes a cert to Active Directory. I have a post on my blog about why setting this is probably not the greatest idea. So really you don't want to do this unless you have a specific need to do this, which most organizations do not. Do not automatically re-enroll if a duplicate certificate template exists in Active Directory. This is how sometimes organizations try to control the issuing of the certificate. So the idea is if I have both of these checked, I'll only enroll for a certificate once, right? Even if I log into a different machine, I won't get a new certificate because I already have one in Active Directory. A little bit wonky. I really would avoid using these settings if you can. Compatibility, this is just the OS level of your client and the CA, and this is going to determine what version template it is and what settings are available in the template. Request handling, so this is something, again, I'm probably not going to go through every single setting because y'all will not be able to stay awake for that, but here's the purposes of what the certificate can be used for. You can change this, usually you would not. Archive subjects encryption private key, you would do this if you had key archival enabled and you wanted to archive the private key for certs that are issued. Very rarely will you provision private key permissions through this, but you can do that. some applications you might have like network service that needs to have access to the private key, or a server's account that needs to have access to a private key. That can be done there. Allow private key to be exported. So like if you're doing like a web farm and you need to request that cert on one machine and then export it and install on the other servers in the web farm, that'll allow you to do that. That's all I'm going to really cover. I'm just going to cover the most used things. I'm not going to go into exhaustive detail here for the sake of time and for your sanity. This is cryptography, so you can set this to a CSP or you can set it to a key storage provider. This will provide you different options. So obviously if it was a CSP, the main thing is my algorithm is determined by the CSP. So if it's an RSA CSP, then it's going to be RSA. If I choose KSP, then I have options to some of these other settings here that are available. There's elliptic curve, Diffie-Hellman settings. Basically, I can say use whatever the computer that's requesting a cert wants to use, or I can specify a specific CSP or KSP that the computer needs to use, depending on whatever. This request hash is stuff that's in the actual request for the certificate. This is if you have it set at SHA-1, you're not getting a SHA-1 certificate. That's determined somewhere else. But this is just for the request, so you can strengthen this if you want to. I don't really see a lot of people change that. Key attestation. This is for TPMs. We're not going to get into that right now today. Superseded templates. This is kind of a little bit complex to describe. So let's say you have domain controller certs on domain controllers, and you want them to use this domain controller authentication certificate instead. Well, you can provision them access to this authentication template, and then you can supersede the domain controller template. And if you do that when the domain controllers enroll for the domain controller authentication certificate, and they get it, they will then archive their domain controller certificate. So that's what that's used for. And in fact, most of the scenarios that involve using it are for domain controller certificates typically. Extensions here, you can actually manipulate what's going to be stamped in the extension of the certificate. So application policies are what the certificate can be used for. Basic constraints is not usually something that you modify. It usually just tells you whether it's a CA certificate or not. Certificate template information, you usually don't change this. This is a good place to come to though. If you have a template and you're not sure whether it's a user or a computer template, usually it'll list whether it's a user or a computer template, and it just so happens in this one it does not. You can also get the OID for the template, which you may need for certain scenarios. Issuance policies, you may have a different issuance policy, so you may have like a high security CA, a low security CA, and so each one of those would have a different issuance policy. And key usage is basically, I believe, what the private key can be used for, so you can modify that. Again, normally you wouldn't modify these things unless you have like a specific instruction set that tells you to do so. Excuse me. So this is the security in the template. So usually it's there to provision, enroll, and auto-enroll permissions. So by default, authenticated users have read to pretty much all the templates, and then it's a matter of whether they have authenticated users also usually have request certificates permission as well. But then you usually provision either enroll, which would be allow the user or machine to manually enroll for a certificate, or like an auto-enroll setting, which you combined with the auto-enrollment GPO would allow you to auto-enroll for the certificate. If you're doing auto-enrollment, you need to check both of these, because it uses auto-enroll for the initial enrollment, I believe, and then enroll for the renewals. You can also give full control or right, so if you need somebody to modify the template, you can give them those rights. Although I will say kind of delegating the kind of template administrator role is a little bit more involved than just doing that, because if you want to have them have access to other templates, there are some places in AD that you need to permission, and for the sake of time I'm not going to cover that right now. Server, so if you don't want the resulting certificate to be stored in the database, or if you don't want revocation information stamped in that certificate. That's what these two checkboxes are for. For the first one, there's another setting that you have to enable via command line for that fully to happen, but that's the options here. Let's see, what do we miss? Subject name. So usually definitely for auto enrollment, you would have build from this Active Directory information, and then it will populate either the subject or the SAN with whatever attributes you specify here. And they'll pull them from the domain controller during enrollment. Supplying the request is for like your web server certificates, where the requester is going to put the name of the website in here. And so that's what you would do typically for like web servers. There's this little checkbox. If this was a higher version template, this checkbox would be available. Right now it's kind of grayed out. If you select that, what that allows you to do is like it allows you to re-enroll like a certificate that you specified a custom subject or SAN for. So what would happen is you would request your initial certificate manually, and then if you had an auto enrollment GPO configured, they could re-enroll for a new certificate and basically do that automatically. Issuance requirements. The main one you might do is CA manager approval. So there are some sensitive certificate templates, like the enrollment agent here. So enrollment agent allows a user to enroll for certificates on behalf of another user. So that's kind of a security sensitive operation. So before you give this type of certificate, you would at least want the CA certificate manager to approve it, not just allow anybody to enroll, even if they have permissions. And if you want to get a little bit more granular, you can require like more than one user or more than one identity to approve the request, and you can specify what sort of certificate or template they need to do that. There's not a lot of situations you would do that, and it gets real confusing doing that, but typically the main one you would use is CA manager approval. So that covers all the settings in the template. Again, you'll notice for the version 1 templates, there's really nothing you can change but the security here. And of course they don't have the auto enroll permission. So enterprise CA certificate enrollment. So we're going to cover how enrollment works for enterprise CA. So here's my kind of crude graphic to kind of describe that. So when the client goes to enroll, they query Active Directory over LDAP for a list of certificate templates, right? And then client caches the list of certificate templates in the registry. So if you look in your registry on your machine, of course it depends on whether you're looking at the computer or user. We'll look at the user, we'll look at the computer here. So if we go to computer and see if I can remember this, software, policies, Microsoft, nope. Security software, Microsoft, cryptography. You'll see I have this certificate template cache, and it has all the templates cached here from AD. So going back to my crude graphic here. During a manual enrollment, like if you're using like the web enrollment pages or the certificates MMC, you get listed. You get a list of templates that either the user or the computer has the ability to enroll for. In other words, the ones they have permission to. If it's, I think I have one for auto enrollment. If you're doing auto enrollment, the client does all that in the background, figures out which template the computer user has access to, and if whether they should enroll for it. Do they already have one? Do they need one? So that's all handled by the operating system, basically the auto enrollment client at that point. Then once the computer user has a list of templates, then it needs to find out which CAs have that template. So it'll query Active Directory, that specifically the enrollment services objects, to figure out which CAs have that template. By default, they'll get sent back a pseudo-random list of CAs, so it's not site-specific, but there is some additional configuration you can do on the CA to make this site aware so that the user or computer goes to a CA that's closest to them from that Active Directory sites and services standpoint. Yeah, so during auto-enrollment, again, the client will figure out which template they need to go to, and they'll pull the enrollment services object, figure out which CA they need to go to, and then basically the client will generate a request, the public and private key pair, and the request and public key are submitted to the CA over RPC. If it meets all the rules of the template, like if they have permissions to it and all that sort of stuff, then they'll end up, the CA will basically sign the request and give them, maybe modify some of the attributes in the request and send them back a signed request or certificate. And then the machine will basically, the OS in behalf of the computer or user will install that in the appropriate certificate store and bind it to the private key so the certificate can be used. You can do just a quick demo. So we'll just use the certificates MMC. So we'll do the computer one and just do kind of an enrollment. So I'm just going to go to personal, all tasks, request new certificate. And then here I'm just going to select RDP for this case and then click enroll. And then I'm going to get a certificate back. If you don't want to submit the request right away, then what you can do is you can go to advanced operations here, create custom request, click next, and then choose whatever template you want to do. So we'll do like, say we have a web server one, we'll do web server, next, and then I can go in here and manipulate my request so I can add a SAN if I want to. I can go and modify the friendly name. I can go in here and change some of these different attributes in the certificate, whether the key can be exported or not. So I can do all that, and once I get the configuration I want, I click next, and then I can save the resulting request file. And then later, if I want to submit that request, then I can do that. Okay, from current slide, so here we go. So that was my quick demo, and apparently that was a quicker presentation than I thought. So that covers basically enrollment using like the RPC enrollment, which is the native enrollment for certificates and PKI in Windows. So what I'll actually, so actually I did break this up in the further presentation. So I will do a follow-up lesson on auto-enrollment and a follow-up lesson on manual enrollment, and then hopefully at some point down the road I'll cover some of the other enrollment technologies. So the key takeaways here are that if you are using the Microsoft PKI for enrollment, a lot of this happens over RPC and leverages Kerberos authentication. And as you can see, it's heavily, the components of it are tied into Active Directory, so definitely there's a lot of integration with the Active Directory domain controllers. And this is basically how that's basically how enrollment works for most scenarios. There are other scenarios, like for example, you can use the web enrollment pages. In that sense, the server with the web pages is kind of doing this RPC stuff in the background. You can do certificate enrollment web services, which allows you to use username and password authentication and certificate authentication. You can use Cisco's simple certificate enrollment protocol, which is supported by our NDES, or Network Device Enrollment Service. So you can use that as an enrollment as well. And as you've seen in this demo, you can definitely leverage the MMC, which we use in the native RPC enrollment. So that's all I have for today. That one much shorter than I was anticipating, but if you are interested in more of my content, of course you can continue going through my channel here on YouTube, or you can go to my blog at https://xdot509.blog. Feel free to leave any comments. If you have any questions for me, you can follow up with me on my contact page on my blog, or you can, what else can you do? You can obviously leave messages on the video. I have lately been checking, I started checking like the PKI subreddit on Reddit for questions, so if I have time and time allows and you post a question there about certificates, I will try to answer it if I know the answer. So you can probably post a question there as well and I'll try to view it. But once again, thank you for viewing this video, and if you like it, view some of my other videos, let your colleagues know, and leave me a message if there's anything that you're interested in that you would like me to do a video or a blog posting on. And thank you very much for viewing this, and I will see you next time. Thank you.